Hi, everyone. Waiting for the rest of our team to show up. There they are. We do have one more person, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you all to the 15th Annual Lit Fest. My name is Andrea Dupree. I'm the program director here. This is obviously our first ever virtual Lit Fest. If you have critiques and commentary, please don't share. No, just kidding. You can share with us later. I'm very pleased to be introducing tonight Emily Rapp Black and Akhil Sharma, who have both been to Lit Fest in the past, as you saw evidence of in the slideshow that was showing earlier. And Jami Attenberg, who we were looking forward to meeting in person for the first time this year. So maybe we'll have to lord this over her to come back in some future year if we ever all get to come back again, which I think we will. I'm going to say yes. I know this is a time of great interest and a lot of different pressures on people, and we thank you for spending an hour thinking about literature and the people who write it. Maybe some of you do the same and you find comfort in that, and I think we all are using it how we do. We have a nice trove of videos from some of the other visiting authors we've had at Lit Fest that you can check our YouTube channel for. We've had Sarah Broom, Jane Hirschfield, Andre Dubusse III, Melissa Febos, Denez Smith. There are a bunch of different things that you can access on our webpage. So also tomorrow, I want you to know that Hanif Abdurraqib and Ariana Rains will be reading at our happy hour. And then on Thursday, Garth Greenwell and Sheila Heti. These events are all free and open to the public. All you need to do is register to get the links. We need to thank the SCFD, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Bonfee Stanton Foundation, and Colorado Creative Industries for helping us make Lit Fest 2020 possible. And of course, all of you on the other side of this Zoom. I know you're used to showing up and being able to talk and stuff on these Zoom experiences. Don't fret, that is not something you can do right now, but you can send questions via the Q&A down at the bottom, and we'll get those questions to the readers after they read. So I'm going to start us off with Jami Attenberg, who I've heard advance warning is going to be reading something filthy tonight. Well, not filthy, but something dirty, which we could all use, right? She is teaching a group of fiction writers this weekend. She's the author of Instant Love, a collection of short stories, followed by 6 novels, including The Middlesteins, St. Maisie, All Grown Up, and All This Could Be Yours, which came out last year. Her work has appeared on the New York Times bestseller list and has been published in 10 countries. The Middlesteins was a finalist for both the LA Times Book Prize for Fiction and the St. Francis College Literary Prize. St. Maisie has been optioned by Fable Pictures. She lives in New Orleans, Louisiana. Let's hear it for her.
Hi. I can see the other two folks clapping. Thanks. I like, for my ego, I turned it onto the gallery so that I could see at least 2 people were watching me. So I was trying, usually when I give a reading, I'm able to kind of read the room and see what people are in the mood for. But in this instance, obviously, you're coming in kind of blind and just sort of guessing and reading what you feel like reading. And I kind of wanted to read something funny. Always weird to read something funny when you don't know if anyone's laughing, but it will at least entertain me, I hope. And I'm going to read from All Grown Up, which is my 6th book. And it's set in New York, and I've been thinking a lot about New York lately, and all my friends there. So I'm going to read that. And it's about a woman named Andrea, and these chapters kind of operate. I mean, it is a novel, but they operate also like as individual stories of a kind. So I don't think you need too much preamble. And all the stories are named after, or all the chapters are named after women. And this chapter is called Chloe. And Andrea Byrne is the narrator. We meet at a mutual friend's barbecue, Baron and I. Our mutual friend's name is Deb, and she has told me in advance to look out for him. Newly single, she had texted, like newly. Fresh out of the womb, I texted back. Successful, creative, smart, she texted. A catch, I texted. In a year, he'll be a catch, she texted. Right now, he's a good time. Am I not good enough for a catch, I texted. She didn't text back for 6 hours. Sorry, she texted. Work. There was another pause. Am I mistaken that you want to have a good time? She texted. I had wanted to argue so badly, but I couldn't. Baron and I have an extremely long conversation about potato salad because Deb has made 2 kinds of potato salad, the creamy kind and the vinegary kind. It's a dumb, jokey conversation, kind of worthless actually, but he looks at me with obvious interest and desire. I get a little hot in my pants. He has a shaved head, the early male pattern baldness shave. He cleans his glasses a lot, and I point this out, and he shrugs and says, I can't stand fingerprints. I take his glasses from him, breathe on them, and wipe them on the end of my silky shirt. Like new, I say, and hand them back. You're helpful, he says. At some point in the conversation, we realize we live 10 blocks from each other. Convenient, I say, and grin. Deb lives in a garden apartment, and there are children running in and out of the garden in the apartment, and one of them screeches, and I shudder. Children, ugh, I say. I have a child, Baron says. Just because I don't like children doesn't mean I can't like you, I say, and I touch his arm and feel like both a failure and a success at the same time, because even though I have already fucked this up, I was probably supposed to anyway. 2 normal people walk away from each other right then and there. But instead, he gives me a ride home and parks in front of a fire hydrant on my street, and then we make out in the front seat of his car while I ignore the presence of the child seat in the back. He's really aggressive, tongue in the mouth, ear, throat, squeezing my breast hard through my blouse. I'm both mortified and aroused. I put my hand on his dick through his pants, and he stops and says, you're the first person I've been with besides my ex-wife in 12 years. I say, whoa, that's a lot for a first date. And he says, this wasn't a date. And I feel suddenly hoarse and damaged. Okay, I say, I'm done. I put my hand on the door, but I give him a few seconds to apologize, which he does. He says, I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm coming or going. I'm having every emotion at once. He takes my hand and kisses it. You're beautiful, he says. You're beautiful and sexy, and you should let me take you out and we'll do this right. Toxic, says my coworker Nina on Monday morning. Drop him immediately. He texts me on Wednesday and asks if I want to have dinner with him on Friday night. I say I have plans because I'm trying to play hard to get, which has absolutely never worked for me in my entire life. He says he can't see me on Saturday because he has his daughter that night. I fold instantly. I'll move something around, I say. We pick a restaurant in the neighborhood, but it is a pretense because we both know what is going to happen. We've been texting about the things we're going to do to each other for days. It's terrible and it's all I want. On Friday, I take off work early and get groomed in various ways. Then I go to Dean and DeLuca and buy blueberries, and then I allow myself the indulgence of a MoMA visit. I pay $25 and go up to the top floor and wend my way through the museum. Eventually, I find myself lingering around their permanent collection, all that work those people made for decades, and here's their greatest hits, 1 or 2 pieces plucked from storage. Better the one piece than none at all, I guess. I miss painting, even the fumes I miss. I've spent the past 13 years looking for a smell to replace it. Hours later, I'm smelling all of him, his fumes. A cocktail at the bar before reservation. I am 38 and he is 42. I'm just getting over, he tells me. Sometimes I feel like I'm done, I tell him. Dinner is fast, but I still try to enjoy myself because I love food at the weirdest, darkest, most stressful moments of my life. I always make sure to have a nice meal. I order a steak. I want it rare, I tell the waitress. Like bloody red. Carnivore, he says. That's me, I say. We drink 2 glasses of wine each, and I say, you know what we should have done? And he says, gotten the bottle. I never planned that right, I say, and he says, me neither, and we smile at each other. Let's just get along. I think all we have to do is get along. We walk to my apartment, not his, which he claims is a mess. He's wearing a hat and a chambray shirt and shorts and loafers, and he has an easy stride. I'm wearing a black dress, loose and summery. I feel pretty and intellectually engaged after my day of art. Also, I feel drunk. At home, there is bourbon, and I tell him that while we walk, and he tells me I'm a dream girl. Like he literally says, I feel like you were sent to me as a present from the heavens above. And I laugh so hard, but I love it. When we get to my studio, he surveys it and nods. The art, the stacks of books, the pots and pans dangling dramatically from the ceiling rack, while I shakily, excitedly pour us 2 bourbons neat. We clink glasses and then drink quickly. This is so exciting, he says. I'm so excited. I boldly take off my dress.
I'm just standing there naked in front of him. I love all the curves, he says. Hips. Yes, he is nodding at me, approving of me. I realize I am desperate for his approval. This man who was married, this father of one, someone else's, now mine. He takes off his hat and then his shirt and then his pants. He is pale white and nearly hairless, and I realize he has trimmed his pubic hair. Did you? I point to his crotch. I thought I was supposed to. He says, I did it in GQ. I really haven't seen it before. I say, I think I went a little too far. He says, I waxed my chest too. It hurt. I waxed too. I say, just here though. I motion to my crotch. It looks nice on you. He says, normal. Our confession's done, we kiss, and then he's on me, and it's happening. It's on. He bends me over my couch and from behind begins to pound me. There's a mirror nearby, and I can see that he's watching himself, watching his facial expression. This moment has so little to do with me. After a while, we try another position, and then another position, and then another position, and then another one. Can we go back? I say, what? Huh? He gasps, pushes his glasses up, looks at me. I like what we were doing before, like 10 minutes ago. Hold on, he says, and he stops to clean his glasses with my nearby underpants. Then we rearrange our bodies to the old position and we move very slowly, and it's fantastic. But then he starts to speed up and he goes faster and harder, and it feels like he's trying to murder me with his dick. And I say, slow down a little, baby. And he says, I can't, I'm gonna come, don't make me stop. So I don't, because this is his first time fucking a person other than his wife in 12 years, and it's with me, and I want him to remember it as great. I let him pound me for another minute, and he orgasms loud, certainly loud enough to be heard from the street below. And he's just so proud of himself. And almost immediately I begin to hate him, but also desire him even more too. I get myself off with a little assistance from him, an orgasm in a minor key. And then we sit at my kitchen table naked and eat the blueberries, which have ripened since I bought them and left them in the sun by the window. I talk happily while I shove blueberries in my mouth. I'm always such an idiot after sex. At some point, I realize he's stopped eating blueberries and he's watching me eat, and I'm still eating, and then I finish the entire bowl. I sit back. What? I say, I've got to go. I'm sorry, he says. He puts on all his clothes. I'm still naked. I'm just sitting there watching him make his exit. Am I being weird? He asks. I don't know. I say, are you? And then he's gone. No evidence left behind except the light blue imprint of his fingers on my upper arm, which was where he held me too tightly. The next day, he apologizes via text for fucking me and leaving, and I forgive him. We banter a bit about the sex we had. There is an acknowledgement that he is hard on one side of the conversation, and I am wet on the other side. Then he has to go. His kid is coming. How'd it go? Asks Nina Monday morning, first thing. He freaked out and left after sex, I say. Oh, well, says Nina. How'd it go? Texts Deb. He's really nice. I text back. Do you like him? She says. I don't reply. Baron and I volley texts back and forth for a few days about seeing each other again. No specific plans are made. Just let's hang out soon. The next week, I see him on the street. He's walking with his daughter, holding her hand with one hand and a plastic bag of groceries with the other. The green stems of carrots poking out the top of the bag. She is wearing a blue flowered black backpack. Her mother must be of Asian descent. She's a beautiful little girl. Baron sees me coming from a block away, waves, and then crosses to the other side of the street. How dare you? I text him later. You told me you hate children. He texts back. Done.
How do you clap on
Thank you
Zoom?
very much. Thank you.
That was as promised. I feel like you may have just broken the internet, Jami. That was something else. Thank you for that. And now I feel like I understand manscaping better. So
that makes one of us.
So our next reader is Emily Rapp Black. She's working this week with 10 nonfiction writers and is the author of Poster Child, a memoir, and The Still Point of the Turning World, which was a New York Times bestseller, an editor's pick, and a finalist for the PEN USA Award in Nonfiction. A former Fulbright scholar and recent Guggenheim Fellow, she was educated at Harvard University, Trinity College Dublin, St. Olaf College, and the University of Texas, Austin, where she was a James A. Michener Fellow. She has 2 books forthcoming in 2021, Sanctuary from Random House, and A Cartography for Cripples, Sex, Disability, and Fetish through the Work life and work of Frida Kahlo. She lives in Southern California, where she is Associate Professor of Creative Writing at the University of California, Riverside. I want to mention she's teaching a 2-hour craft talk tomorrow on how the Bible taught her to write at 6 p.m. So we'll put a little link in there. And let's give it up for Emily Rapp Clack.
Oh my gosh, I sound like such a drag in that bio. It's like, wah, wah, wah. Also, I'll say that the craft talk, it has no scripture. There's nothing about like religion. It's just about craft. Yeah. So I'm going to read from my book Sanctuary, which is a book about losing a life and building a new life. And it's a redo of the Phoenix myth, which is indeed a myth, and also an examination of the word resilience, with which I have a long and complicated relationship. This is actually the scene of my son's death. And so just trigger warning if anybody wants to bow out. But for me, it was important to write it because people kept saying to me, oh, he's passed on. That's so great. It was so peaceful, but that was not the case, as is not ever the case. If you are someone who has watched someone die or works with dying people, or does any kind of hospice work like I do, then you know that's not ever true. So I just want to blow the lid on that. And this is from the chapter, it's part of the chapter called The Long Winter, which is a shout out to my love of Laura Ingalls Wilder books as a child. I'm from Wyoming. I know. I think it might have, that whole, knowing that whole, or reading that whole series may have ruined my sex life for like most of my life, but that's okay. I still love those books. So, yeah. So it's called The Long Winter. It is not possible to accurately record a child's death. It will always be an accurate half of the whole story. But it is this origin story that underlies all the stories that follow. Every laugh, every triumph, every moment of peace. First, a death. The time of my son's death was 2:32 a.m. on February 15th, 2013. He died of GM2 gangliosidosis, a rare inherited disorder that progressively destroys nerve cells, neurons in the brain and spinal cord. Tay-Sachs disease. I sometimes imagine the slick-limbed skeletons in the chilly corners of the orthopedic clinic waiting rooms of my childhood. I saw them lit and burning, the flames moving quickly up the spine, reaching the brain last and spreading out like a fiery web, burning bone as if it were no more than grassland, a complete conflagration. Ronan's death certificate records his time of death as 7:30 a.m., but at 2:40 a.m., when I called the hospice nurse, Cynthia, and begged, please don't call anyone yet. I was asking her to lie. She did. Although Ronan had been declining and slowly diminishing quite dramatically during January, it was during the week of Valentine's Day, just when the weather became consistently bitter and incessantly gray, that he began the final stage of dying, or what's known as actively dying, as if the damage his disease had done to this point was passive. What I did observe were the changes, some subtle, others more dramatic. His skin started to turn a mottled blue for 5 and 10 minute labors of time, small agonies of time, before returning to its original pale color. These collections of minutes were little terror ships set to sail and then called back to shore again and again. Our panic and calm traveled in waves. He had turned blue before, but only once, and that time we had held him upside down until the blood returned to his face. Now he was too delicate for that. We were simply waiting, which was the only kind of holding we could do. Sometimes a shadow crossed his face, a change in light so pronounced it produced the urge to turn around and see who or what was there. Dark impressions began appearing under his eyes and then disappearing as if they'd been pressed there and then suddenly erased, as if someone marked him, changed their mind, marked him again. A tube delivered fluids through his nose, what the hospice nurse referred to as a comfort care intervention. The little tube taped to his face trembled with each of his shallow breaths. Those of us who loved Ronan dangled from each strange and precious moment. We made lunch, scraped the food into the trash, washed the dishes, put them away. We dumped laundry detergent over dirty clothes. We drank water and red wine and said, I love you, because it was a designated day to express such sentiments. When I couldn't stand the waiting, I would run and run and run to Eminem's rage-filled beats as if I were in training for a race. My jaw ached from being braced as if I could fight grief with my face. Worry was pointless at this stage. It was dread, the heart's cold sweat, The shades in the bedroom were drawn, but I had, on many nights alone in this bed, stared out at the bright swoop of the moon in the corner of the window as if it had been intentionally hung there, a magnet stuck to the sky. Sometimes it felt hopeful, other times as haunting as the line from Sylvia Plath's poem, The Elm. I know the bottom, she said. I know it with my great taproot. It is what you fear. The snow on the ground, fossilized night after midwinter night, would melt slowly when the sun rose. The drains in the street on the roof would run with clear, cold water. So I longed for light, for movement and sound, signaling morning, breath, and sunshine. But this also meant we were one step closer to the final change, that we'd grasped a new rung on the ladder and had now entered another stage of dying. So I dreaded it as well. Time was the keeper. Time was the enemy, the creator, the muse. Time was nothing at all, a useless and arbitrary metric. According to Cynthia, the hospice nurse, with her cheery, booming voice, a woman I thought of as a walking, talking floral bouquet in her long, brightly colored skirts, it was indeed, quote, only a matter of time for Ronan. So we waited. I'm praying to Jesus, she promised. Jesus can't do shit for Ronan right now, I thought. Just get the morphine ready, and she did. The clear liquid waited in syringes like arrows in a quiver, but there were other kids dying too, and she sometimes had to answer her constantly ringing phone. Call you right back, she'd shout into the phone, and okay, I'll fax that prescription ASAP. It seemed as if she were speaking through a megaphone like a middle-aged death cheerleader. I shifted between the desire to push her out the door and the desire to hold her forever in this room by my side. If she stayed, Rona stayed alive, right? We could pause forever in this liminal state. Of course, we could not stay. The oxygen machine that once bucked and hummed like a failing car engine sat silently in the closet, shoved in the corner next to the sleek green oxygen containers and the nebulizer with its tiny pink tubes of saline secured inside a plastic bag. On the day of the first walk outside after Ronan died, my parents pulled down their coats from the closet, the zippers and buttons clanking against the hard apparatus of the sick that now looked ridiculous and cruel. Divested of their use and power and sandwiched between infinitely more useful winter boots and house slippers. It was like discovering a piece of a Viking ship in the closet, like finding an electric chair in the city dump. Please take the machines away, I requested, and they were taken away. Everyone did everything I asked during those final days, but nobody could give me what I wanted, what I needed, what I had to have but could not have and would never have again. My son returned to me, his brain repaired, time unwound, the long history of hatred that had produced this disease that killed him erased. I wanted nothing less than a new world and my son allowed to live within it. We waited. All of the death paperwork had been filled out and lay stacked in a folder, although I didn't remember the answers, who would declare death, where the body would go, how long next of kin would stay with the body. I heard my mom on the phone in the back room with the gas fireplace produced a steady cone of heat, her voice quiet and tired, talking to a friend, telling her, yes, yes, I know. We're here for the duration. The word felt thunderous and inevitable, the final curse for an already doomed boy. It was midwinter in northern New Mexico. A few cracked and frozen leaves fell to the ground and made a scraping sound, or lay trembling, trapped by a typical wind made suddenly strange, in the brown yard or on the concrete sidewalk. According to Ronan's death certificate, a piece of light blue paper with a vaguely royal-looking imprint from the funeral home that must be presented to demonstrate, as the insurance company calls it, proof of loss. My son was never married, born on March 24th, 2010, in possession of a social security number, 611-814007, inactive in the armed forces, a member of no tribe. He was a baby, then briefly a boy, and then after the moment of his death, he was antecedent. Another way of saying it, gone. I will carry him, the undertaker promised in the heavy quiet of Ronan's nursery. Pink walls, posters of happy clowns, a changing table, a closet full of clothes, minutes after he died and where his shrouded body lay in the crib. I had picked out that piece of Irish linen with my friend Tara a year before and asked her to embroider Ronan's name on it. This one, I said in the store, handing her the bolt to cut, this one. Fierce Arizona sunlight struck the windows of the fabric store and Tara set her hand on my back. The night before this one, I had pulled the fabric from the bag where it had been stored and carefully laid out, remembering how Tara held the bolt straight and the clean sound of the scissors through the linen as I cut. I will keep him in the front with me, the undertaker said. I will keep watch. She had long veined fingers and wore her dark hair in braids like a young girl. We lifted Ronan up. His body was light, so light, yet heavy as the newly dead. I stood with Ronan's father in the doorway of the house where we had lived unhappily together, and we watched the mortuary van drive away, our final act as parents to our child. I wiped my dry mouth over and over again until my lips began to burn. I had a strange memory of a woman who once held my forehead in a New York City subway station in 1992 while I puked up a pitcher of beer over a line of rats marching across the train tracks, and then handed me a fistful of tissues to wipe my mouth. Who was she? She was wearing an orange sweater. She had clean hands. Why that memory in this moment? My heart was a rubber band connected to the spoke of the van's wheels, straining, stretching, then snapping. One Sunday morning in March, I filed the record of Ronan's death in the same file with his birth certificate. 2 pieces of paper dated less than 3 years apart, a span so short it generated a dizzying surge of rage. The great brevity of my son's life, what Teju Cole described as the space of unfinished histories. Oh, I was angry. If a person, a ghost, an apparition had walked through the door and told me it was the personification of Tay-Sachs, I would have strangled it gleefully, easily, with my bare and trembling hands. I had no place to set down my rage, so for a time I set it down on myself. Ronan had no descendants. He did have survivors, but for the longest, ever-lengthening length of time, I did not want to be one of them, or more accurately, I did not yet know how.
Wow. Thank you, Emily. I would like to encourage everyone to take a deep breath and kind of revel in the vulnerability that was just shared with us, and also the extremes of emotion that literature can deliver. Thank you for that. That was beautiful. I am going to introduce our final reader now, Akhil Sharma, whose most recent novel, Family Life, won the 2015 Folio Prize for Fiction. His first book, An Obedient Father, a novel set in Delhi during the period of Rajiv Gandhi's assassination, won the PEN/Hemingway Prize and has been published in numerous languages. He's also an award-winning story writer whose work has appeared in The New Yorker and The Atlantic, as well as a number of other publications. His latest collection, A Life of Adventure and Delight, was released 2 years ago to great critical acclaim. A native of Delhi, he's now a professor of practice at Duke University. Please welcome Akhil Sharma.
Unmute. Thank you very much. It was very, very powerful hearing the 2 readings. And it's amazing how, when you read good literature, or in this case, hear literature, you're transported. Like when I heard Jami read, I'm divorced, and I remember when I heard Jami read, I remembered the first woman that I slept with after I had gotten divorced, and feeling such astonishing guilt right after I'd had sex, as if I had been unfaithful, and the wanting to just jump and run away because I felt such shame and guilt, although I was divorced. It was really powerful hearing that, to be brought back into that memory. And it was very powerful to hear Emily read, obviously. And it reminded me of when my brother died, and I came into the room where he was lying dead, and I began kissing him, and I would kiss him and I would lift my head, and then my head would go down again, almost as if he were a magnet. And I would kiss him, and I just couldn't stop kissing him. In some ways, I don't really want to read good literature. Like, I don't want to have these experiences or relive them. I would like to spend my life looking at eBay. In some ways, I think I would rather just do that than have to feel what great literature can make us feel. I say this, but of course that's not true. I hear Jami and I'm some of the loneliness is removed. And I hear Emily and some of my loneliness is removed. So I'm gonna read to you guys from a new novel that I'm working on. It's very, very rough. I've written it in first person, I've written it third person, it's a real mess of a problem. So I'll just read and I'll talk to you about what I was thinking when I wrote this, when I wrote these passages that I'm going to read to you. When I was 3 or 4, I used to run from room to room so my mother could admire how fast I was. When she looked at me, I would get excited and run even faster. I hoped to marry my mother one day and thought being fast might help in convincing her. I also ran because I worried she might leave. I thought if she saw how fast I was, she might take me with her. I worried about her leaving because she told me she might. I can go at any moment, she said. You think I will cry for this life? So I typically, when I write, what I try to do is I try to get the reader to engage with the character and to believe that this character is a real person. Because once you've established that credibility, that credibility can then get lent out to other things around the inside the story. So you don't need to establish a visual world as fully if you've established the character fully. So I've been working on this passage for quite a while, and I'm not totally certain about it. So when I was 3 or 4, I used to run from room to room so my mother could admire how fast I was. I'm okay with that sentence. When she looked at me, I would get excited and run even faster. I don't know whether I should have written it as when she would look at me, I would get excited and run even faster. Just because I'm not sure whether I want to make clear that this thing is in the past tense. Because if I make clear that it's written in the past tense, certain emotions become stronger. Or whether I should get rid of this image completely and go from when I was 3 or 4, I used to run from room to room so my mother could admire how fast I was. I hoped to marry her one day and thought being fast might help in this. So I don't know whether I should aim for speed or whether I should allow the reader more time to occupy this space. But I'm fiddling with it. I do, however, like the ending of this very, very beginning, where, I worried about her leaving because she told me she might. I can go at any moment, she said. You think I will cry for this life? I like that because I like when the reader goes in one direction and then is yanked in another direction. I'll continue. My mother was an ordinary, uneducated woman. My family was one of those Indian families where alcohol and village-type patriarchy mix, where women pull a fold of their sari over their head when they walk into a crowded room. My father once raped my mother in front of me. This was when I was 6 or 7. My room was next to my parents'. Our house had very little furniture and I slept on a strip of foam on the floor. One night I was lying on my back and I heard my father shouting, "I'll drown you in a well if I want." Hearing my parents fight, I became small inside. The room was small. The room was warm. My hands and feet felt far away. The fighting continued, and a few minutes later, my mother rushed in. I felt a jerk in my chest. She lay down on the foam sheet and grabbed me. We faced each other, our eyes bright. My mother had an oval face and curly hair. Her breath was bitter, like how my shirt collars tasted when I chewed on them. My father came in. The room began to feel very small. My mother glanced over her shoulder. "Show some shame." He was standing beside us looking down. "You have no shame, but you think I should." He lowered his pajamas. His erection was like a piece of wood. It was the first time I had seen an erect penis. The sight made no sense. What was this thing I was seeing? And the scene ends here. I am, again, I'm not certain. I recently, in a recent tweaking of this passage, I got rid of what occurred next, where the child hops up and begins kicking his father. And the mother says, good, keep kicking him, which I was hoping would read as comedy. But for various reasons, I had difficulty read as black comedy, obviously. But I'm not sure whether to leave it in. I'm also unsure whether this is too grim a thing to put in at the very, very beginning, right? Like mostly you got to get the reader into the story before you begin beating on the reader. So I'm not certain whether I should I'll put this piece in. In other variations, I have not put it in. This section has not existed. I'll continue. Many years later, I asked my mother about that night. I was in my late 30s and she was sitting on the sofa in the living room. First, she denied it had ever happened. Denying things was something she did often. It was easier for her to do this because we only spoke in Hindi, and my Hindi is not as precise as my English, and so slight blurrings of meaning allow one to lie without taking on the moral responsibility of lying. There isn't an exact equivalent to kicking in Hindi, and so you have to combine hitting with another word. I said to her, remember when I hit him with my legs instead of saying hit with my feet? I don't remember, my mother said. You're making things up again. My mother minded my mentioning anything that suggested I had had an unhappy childhood, and so she often accused me of lying. I was going to a therapist at the time, and he had been trying to help me ask the questions I wanted to ask, instead of worrying about the feelings of the people who I was asking. This was before we had beds, I said. We got beds when I was in 7th grade. My mother became angry. Your father never did anything wrong. The only thing he did wrong was not give me money. That was the only thing. So in this section, what is most intriguing or interesting to me is this thing about the mother saying that the only thing he did wrong was not give money. One of the reason I find this so interesting is that when we think about rape, we think about it, I mean, I'm American, I was raised here. We think about it largely within the context of America. Whereas when you think about rape in the context of the developing world, there's so many things which are even worse than rape, primarily extraordinary poverty, that people will focus on that instead of the rape. You know, women will complain not about being raped, but about that somebody sees to try to seize their little bit of property. So it's interesting. Again, I'm not sure what to do with this right now. I'll continue. In many ways, my father did not matter much to me. He was a frightening presence, but he did not occupy me emotionally the way that my mother did. My mother trained me in shame. Our living room had a single long window. The pane of this was cracked. We did not have the money to replace it, and a sheet of plastic was taped over it. My mother was always reminding me that I was responsible for this, that I had thought I knew better than her, and so had thrown a ball inside the house. I don't know how fair it is to blame a 15-year-old for his reasoning when he was 5. During storms, the sheet would puff and flap. It would make snapping sounds. My mother would become hysterical. I feel like I'm in a factory. 10 years ago, you did this, and still I'm suffering. I had no real sense of money. I had the feeling that once money was spent, it was gone forever, and I had the sense that by breaking the window, I had harmed my family in some permanent way. When I used to go into the living room, I would feel hot with shame. I would feel that I was being looked at by the window. I would hurry through. Long after I'd left my parents' house, my mother told me that some neighborhood boy had broken the window with a BB gun. I asked her why she had said that I had done it. This was after her stroke, and she was seated and her left hand was twitching in her lap like a fish. You grab one thing and hold on to it forever, she accused. I'll continue. My mother aspired, and I think this, much more than her unhappiness, is what made her romantic. She cooked for people, and she was always falling in love with the women she worked for. Our kitchen had an open tin trash can by the stove, and behind the stove, the wall was black with grease. On Sunday evenings, my mother drove around Edison, Metuchen, Woodbridge in her station wagon, pulling into driveways and carrying in aluminum catering trays of food. The women she worked for were doctors or scientists themselves, or often married to them. Even when the women weren't doctors, they had almost all gone to college. My mother would often become infatuated and out of nowhere begin talking about one of them. People don't appreciate Mrs. Aurora. She doesn't talk much, and so they think she's ordinary. While she became infatuated with many women, her one great love was Dr. Khosla. Dr. Khosla had a square face and hairy cheeks. She spoke in the slowest and kindest manner. Neither my mother or I were sick. She would visit us in the evening on her way home from work. I'm just going to stop there. That's 12 minutes. I am a big believer in reading your things out loud to an audience when the story is very rough. My reasoning being that it removes the romance of it. You're no longer writing some special magical thing. You're just creating a machine. And so whether or not the story is tremendously rough, whether or not even you think you could improve it, it's best to read it out loud to make it seem just like some ordinary thing. It's almost like, you're making a shirt. It's not intended to be magical. At least that's how I approach the writing of it. I feel like if you begin to think of your writing as some magical thing, you will waste months and months on revision. Instead, just get it down and then figure out what you need to do to make it better. Thank you for letting me share this with you.
Thank you so much, Akhil, for that kind of masterclass in composition and managing some of the emotional roller coaster we all go through as readers and as writers. I thought that was really astute. We do have some questions from the audience. And I wanted to start with Brad Brockbank asks, I want to know how all three authors mustered the courage to write what they shared. Anyone want to take that on? Well, Akhil, you're still highlighted, so maybe you could start and then we could move to Emily and Jami.
Sure. I mean, the courage to be a writer is not so much the courage of writing something from your life, but the courage of writing badly. Like I have no particular sense of shame, right? I am willing to reveal the most wretched things about myself, right? So that never really bothers me. What bothers me is when you write something that is just sort of awkwardly written, where words repeat. And so the courage to write it isn't hard. The courage to foist it upon others is the hard thing.
Emily, do you have any thoughts on that?
I can unmute myself. I can do that. Yeah, I agree with what Akhil said. And I think that's an amazing way of looking at it. I think I also don't have any real shame about much. For me, at least, a lot of my work deals with addressing taboos about bodies and death and quality of life and really fun topics like that. But I think also, as someone who lives with a disability, I've never had any privacy. So people have been asking me really kind of rude and prudent questions most of my life. So I've learned how to answer them the way that I'd like to answer them, which is in work rather than having to have awkward elevator conversations 5 times a day or more. But I actually do think, I really want to speak to Akhil's point too about this idea of not having it's not magic, like writing isn't magic, it's work, and it's just make the machine. I love that. I'm going to steal it. I'll credit you. But I just think it's so important. Like I'm more mortified by the idea of someone reading a poem that I wrote like when I was 22 than I am about writing about anything else, because it was so bad. So I think that's, that's my 2 cents on that.
What about you, Jami?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was, a lot of times I write to entertain myself. So I don't know about courage. I don't know. I don't feel like afraid when I do it. I do it to like get it out and to like see, to make myself laugh. And I mean, the first draft is always for me. And then I start worrying about audience after that. So I'm never afraid when I'm doing a first draft, because I know that I'm just going to put it all down there. And then maybe I'll have gone too far or something like that. But it's really about my needs. The first draft is always about my needs, and the books are. But then but also it's like being a part of a conversation. I'd be more scared to not write. I've been in places, and I've had part of my life where I haven't written, right? Like I started writing books when my first book came out when I was 34, and I went to undergrad for creative writing, but I graduated when I was 21. So that was like 13 years that I wasn't like really actively writing, or 10 or whatever, that I wasn't really actively writing fiction. And that was when I was afraid. The writing part is when you're, when anything you want to have happen can happen. I think that's it. That's all I got.
That's great. I love that as kind of a battle cry. I want to give you guys a comment and then the next question. The comment is from Scotty Sawyer, who says, even for Lighthouse, this was extraordinary. All of life spanning 3 readings, just amazing. Just want to give you guys that feedback. Here's another question. Do you tend to write out of an uncontrolled first draft and then edit, or do you edit as you go along? Maybe Jami, since you were the last to speak, maybe you could start us off on that, if you have thoughts.
So, yeah, I mean, I do like a draft one. I consider like when I finish a draft, that a first draft, that it's really a draft 1/2, because I handwrite first and then I type it up. So I handwrite in the morning and then I'll type it up in the afternoon. And so there's a sort of a almost second draft process that's existing within that. So I'm a little bit editing as I go along, but I don't know. Also, it's like I've been doing this for a while. So I feel like I know a little bit what I'm doing, like where I can edit a little bit you know what I mean? I feel like all the other writers have been around for a while too. It's like you're going to come out with a certain level, like when I finish a first draft, which maybe it takes me 6 months to have something I can show people, I'm not afraid to show it to people. I'm still here, hopefully. Yeah, I'm not afraid to show it to people, and I think you should be wild in that first draft. I think it's for you. Like it's really when you can break every single rule that you could imagine is in that first draft.
That's great. Thank you. Emily, do you have thoughts?
I mean, I will just sort of echo what Jami said in some sense, that I do think the first draft is you might as well just go all out in that initial draft, because you're going to have to revise it 7,000 times anyway. So you might as well just take a risk. I mean, I do think there's an element of risk taking, and for me, it's one of the things that I've learned in my middle age about writing is that it's more about entering the process with a feeling of curiosity instead of like white knuckling the computer and trying to be a genius, because that didn't really work and doesn't work and isn't the point. So I think, for me, it's just like, what's going to happen today? And so then it becomes fun. And at some point I realized in writing, like if I didn't start having some fun, then it wasn't going to be what I wanted to do. And I don't mean fun like, haha, let's, ring around the rosy fun, but I mean like, if it's not joyful or meaningful or giving me a sense of, vocation, then I need to choose something else. So yeah.
That's great. And Akhil, any thoughts?
I find it easier to be free in the first draft of a short story because I can hold a short story to a large extent in my head. And because, if I go off course, it's only 15 to 22 pages. It isn't going to suck up vast amounts of time. But with a novel, I feel like I am much more careful. Like I'm tapping my way forward, and I regularly stop and look around, and I go out into the sunshine and think about it, and then go back in. So I approach them as very different things. But I think a lot of it is simply who you are as a human being, right? Like, or how much of what you write is voice driven, right? So, like to me, right, Chekhov is a great writer, but to some extent, Chekhov had a shtick, right? And if you're if you are a writer who has a shtick, then it seems that what you're doing is improvising around the shtick. If you don't have a shtick, then it might be a bit more arduous.
What was Chekhov's shtick?
So Chekhov's shtick is pushing the subject of the sentence into the last third of the sentence, right? So that the sentence becomes a tiny bit opaque. The fact that it's opaque then means that the reader is sort of with you, but the reader is not caught up inside the plot, right? So that's why he's described as such an impressionistic writer. And it also allows him to have transitions within sentences, within paragraphs, right? So you can go from topic to topic within a paragraph. This means that he can then just begin to write along an emotion, because what's allowing it to, because he's writing in present tense almost always, and because he's sort of resisting your ability to enter into the plot of the story, the plot doesn't take over. And so it becomes sort of this very sort of eddying thing, like you're going up and down inside the narrative, but the narrative itself is not super compelling. I don't know if that's making, I can show it.
No, but it's just very funny because I think of the word shtick and I sort of think of Catskill comedians.
But he is comic in a very specific way.
Yeah.
You know, like when Vanya, I'm not sure whether it was Vanya or The Cherry Orchard, when it was first produced, it was a disaster. He said that, you guys played it as a tragedy, whereas to him, it's a comedy. And to me, when I read Chekhov, I oftentimes read him as a comic writer. Like these characters are just lunatics.
Sorry, we veered off course there for a second.
No, that's great. I think that is the mandate of the panel, to veer off course. And speaking of comic and Ring Around the Rosies, question for all three from the audience: how has the pandemic affected your creative life? And maybe we extend that out to the social justice protests and Black Lives Matter and et cetera. Anybody have thoughts on that?
I mean, where do you start?
Right? For me, it's like, I mean, in some ways it's having to stay at home is a gift for a writer in some sense, because that's like, I do a lot of my work at home anyway. And so it's just, I think it was a mindset shift. And I certainly think that, I mean, one of the things that I found interesting, which I don't know how it relates to my creative life, but I am in a group of women who all lost their children for a variety of reasons. And, we were always told, when that was happening to us, people would say like, I can't imagine, and, all the usual platitudes. And now all of a sudden people are afraid of going out, and they're like disinfecting the shit out of everything. And it's like, oh yeah, we've been here, like we're pandemic ready. So I sort of felt more equipped than I thought I would. And I think that it has been, I don't know. I mean, the recent, like the World on Fire, I think is a lot of my students at first were saying like, oh, I don't want to write about these things because it's too close to the bone. And my theory about that is, if you're a writer and you're in the world, you need to be observant of what you see, and you may not want to write about it straight away, but you need to be out absorbing experience, or however you are able to do that. So that, because you're a person in a time, and you should write about your time for whatever, whatever's happening during that, and your opinions on it. So yeah, I felt pretty, pandemic ready for like a lot of different reasons. Yeah.
Isn't it wonderful? We as writers are basically pandemic proof, because we're at home anyway. And now whereas before we were the abnormal ones, now everybody has to live like us. I find with the Black Lives Matter, with, when something really awful like that occurs, I find myself emotionally exhausted. I went to this town. I live in North Carolina. I went to a town called Highlands, and there was some sort of very pro-Trump T-shirt in a window, and I just wanted to. After seeing it, I just went back to my hotel room and lay around and looked at my phone, because I feel I don't have it in me to talk to people or to explain things. I find myself not. I would rather these days talk to a person of color, like just so I don't. So I can express my anger more freely, and I can express my sense of paranoia more freely, because if you're not a person of color, I feel like I have to be a rational human being, and I can't express the weird paranoia, the strange conspiracy theories I get in my head. So I find that enervating. I think that affects me negatively.
Thank you. Jamie, anything to add, or shall we move on to? Oops, you're still on mute.
I said, yeah, I don't know. It sucks. It's sad. It's sad. But also like, it's going to be really hard for the next, like, until the election, if not longer than that. And so at some point, like, I feel like I was really sad for the first month of the lockdown because it was so confusing and nobody knew what was going on. And then at some point, like, I've had like writing anxiety for much longer than I've had pandemic anxiety. And my writing anxiety was like, oh no, you have to write. Like this is the thing that you have to tend to most in your life. And so I just started writing again because we have to learn how to write through it. Are we not going to write forever? Like, it could suck forever. Are we not going to make our art forever? So at some point you just go back to work.
That feels like a good wrap up, and it is 5:30. I apologize for the people whose questions didn't get answered, but I think you can turn to each of these writers' books themselves and find a lot of answers and a lot of questions. Again, thank you all three of you for sharing what you did tonight or this evening. It's been really edifying and also very real. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you who attended. We'll hopefully see you around LitFest, maybe tomorrow with Hanif Abdurraqib and Ariana Rains. And until then, thank you all so much. Thanks to the readers. I think there's a virtual groundswell of applause. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.